All right, it's up and running. Speaking of convenience of work, I don't know if you remember some of my long-running students. When I first got here and we were trying to record, it was manual recording and editing and uploading. It was such a pain. The automatic upload to YouTube, so much easier, so much easier. All right, but we were just talking about work, and we're going to continue to talk about work because now we are in the book of Shemot. Right? We have ticked over from Bereshit. We are now into the beginning of the book of Exodus, as it is called in English, or Shemot in Hebrew. And this is, of course, the story of how we went from being an enslaved nation in Egypt to being a free nation in the wilderness. We don't get to Israel until, well, actually the whole next section when we get to the book of Joshua. But what life was like in Egypt is a very important topic. Every time when we are celebrating our Seder, we always remind ourselves that we should imagine that we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. Not just remembering that our ancestors were, but we should try to feel what it was like. Well, what was it like? What was the work like? Who worked? What kind of work? What was that existence? And that's what we're going to focus on, because the Torah does tell us some of that. The Torah also tells us that it got worse, which might make you stop and think, how can it be worse to be a slave than it was yesterday? I mean, it's always horrible, right? Well, that's one of the questions we're going to have to wrestle with. Good? It can always be, apparently so, apparently so. So we're going to start with chapter 5 in Shemot, and that's page 338. All right, we're all set. Found our chapter 5, and we're going to pick it up right on verse 1. So, Moses has been called by God. Let me just make sure we got the backstory here. And he has returned to Egypt, and he is now going to talk to Pharaoh. Don't worry, guys, everything's going to be okay. God has heard your cry. I'm just going to go talk to Pharaoh. We're going to get this sorted out. We'll be out of here in no time. All right. That's kind of where we are. And now reality is going to hit us.
Afterward, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go."
There's the famous line, right? Let my people go.
That they may celebrate a festival for me in the wilderness. But Pharaoh said...
Wait, hold on, what?
A festival in the wilderness.
But that's not... That's longer. I thought it was just let my people go. What's the second half of the verse? Why is Moses asking that we be allowed to go?
So they can have a celebration.
So they can have so they can worship their God, right? That's all that he's asking for. He is not asking in this initial statement for freedom completely, totally, and we're going to go leave and live in some other country. It's just we need time to go worship our God. It's not exactly a lie. Certainly what Moses is talking about here is the easiest level of what should be acceptable to Pharaoh, which is allow these people to worship in the way that they should worship, and we will continue working for you. That's not a bad deal. A little religious freedom, and you get to keep us as slaves. That should be the easiest thing for Pharaoh to agree with. Not so much.
Not so much. Does Pharaoh think he's God?
Well, Pharaoh was God in the eyes of the Egyptians. He didn't think it. He was confirmed constantly by everything around him that he was God.
So would he be okay with people having a different God?
Oh, well, other countries having their own gods. I mean, that was normal, yes.
Yes, okay. But Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should heed him and let Israel go?"
Now, remember that every time it says in this translation, Lord, it's actually talking about God's specific name, right? So this is like saying, who is Frank, right? It's using the actual name of God, not just like a stand-in God, generic God, like anybody could be God. This is specifically talking about God's personal name, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So who is Frank, right? Who is this named God? It'd be like us saying, who's Zeus? Never heard of him, right? that's what Pharaoh's doing towards Adonai.
I do not know, Frank, Lord, nor will I let Israel go. They answered, the God of the Hebrews has manifested himself to us. Let us go, we pray, a distance of 3 days into the wilderness to sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he strike us with pestilence or sword. But the
All
king,
right, wait, what? What was the threat?
pestilence or sword.
Who?
Our God is that strong that he could do that?
To whom?
So legit to the Hebrew.
To the Hebrews,
Yeah, to Hebrews.
right? So he's worried. Moses' first counter offer, if you will, was, no, really, you need to let us go, because God has made it clear that if we don't go, we'll be struck with pestilence and sword. Now, Egyptians here. I know normally we think of the plagues and the horrible things that happened to the Egyptians as being God's opening gambit, but no, God, through Moses, first said, let us go. Pharaoh says no. He says, let us go or else we get it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like holding himself hostage. It's like you've seen Blazing Saddles,
Yeah.
one of the classics of theater, yes?
Yes.
And there's the scene where, is it Cleavon Little?
Yeah.
Takes himself hostage with a gun, right? And he puts a gun to his own head and threatens himself. You're like, you better let me go or he gets it. And it's like, and that's what's happening here, right? He is threatening Pharaoh that if you don't let us go, the Israelites will suffer.
But
Why is-
maybe the hidden sub-agenda, hidden agenda is that if we suffer, we can't work.
That's right.
All right, so it'd be like threatening someone's cow. If you don't let us go, Bessie's not going to be able to give milk. Right? So it's kind of like saying, you need to take care of your farm animals. If you want them to still produce, you need to take care of your slaves if you want them to still produce. So that's why this threat has some meaningfulness to it.
But the king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you distract the people from their tasks? Get to your labors. And Pharaoh continued, the people of the land are already so numerous, and you would have them cease from their labors? That same day, Pharaoh charged the taskmasters and foremen of the people, saying, you shall no longer provide the people with straw for making bricks as before. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. But impose upon them the same quota of bricks as they have been making heretofore. Do not reduce it, but they are shirkers. That's why they cry, let us go and sacrifice to our God. Let heavier work be laid upon the men. Let them keep at it and not pay attention to deceitful promises.
All right, or words of lies or lying words. The word promise isn't actually used in the Hebrew, so just sometimes it helps to clean that up. So what's Pharaoh's response to this request for a religious holiday?
Make them work harder.
Make them work harder, right? But is he actually making them work harder? I mean, the quota is the same, right? They still have to produce, let's call it 100 bricks.
But they have to go and find
The straw.
straws.
Right, so that means they have actually less time to do it.
Or they'll be working very longer days.
Exactly. So they still have to do 100 units of work. The units of work they used to do, they now have to also do an additional amount of work to be able to do their 100 units of work, right? So it'd be like saying, you still have the same job, but from now on, your office is going to be in Daytona. Like, well, okay, I'm still working 8 hours a day in Daytona rather than 8 hours a day in Orlando, but now I've got to drive an hour and a half to get there every day. Okay, so that's 3 hours additional work. But it's not actually the work you're responsible for. It's just a prerequisite for the work you're responsible for. So it's a neat way of adding to their work without actually increasing the amount of work needed from them. Rather than just saying, make more bricks. It's fine. You can do the straw gathering too if you've got this much free time. Make sense? All right, shrewd man, Pharaoh. All right, let's roll on and we're going to see the implications of all of this.
So the taskmasters and foremen of the people went out and said to the people, thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you any straw. You must go and get the straw yourselves, wherever you can find it. but there shall be no decrease whatever in your work. Then the people scattered throughout the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw. Masters pressed them, saying, you must complete the same work assignment each day as when you had straw. And the foremen of the Israelites, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten. Why, they were asked, did you not complete the prescribed amount of bricks, either yesterday or today, as you did before? Then the foreman of the Israelites came to Pharaoh and cried, why do you deal thus with your servants?
All right, so let's make sure we got the line of, so we have taskmasters and foremen, and then the actual workers. All right, so the taskmasters give the order, you're going to have to go get your own straw now. We're not providing it for you anymore, but you still have to make the same amount of bricks. The foremen then see that the people are not producing the amount of bricks. So what happens to the foremen?
They get beat.
They get beaten, right? So the foremen are being punished because the workers that they supervise are not meeting the old quota with this new responsibility to get straw at the same time, right? So the foremen, who are Jewish or Israelite, are the ones who are being the first line of the people suffering, the punished for this increased system, because the people are not making the same quota now that they have this additional work to do. Got it?
Yeah.
And so what do the foremen do? They go to complain, right? So the foremen go to complain about this new arrangement. So these are Israelite foremen who are complaining about this problem.
To Pharaoh.
To Pharaoh, exactly, to Pharaoh. Good?
Yeah.
Clear? Onward.
Why do you deal thus with your servants? No straw is issued to your servants, yet they demand of us make bricks. Thus your servants are being beaten when the fault is with your own people.
He's basically going, well, whose stupid policy was this? Right? This is the way it works. We're your slaves. We know our job. We make bricks. But your taskmasters, they're supposed to drop off the straw, and they're not doing it. So they're getting us in trouble because they're not dropping off the straw. So Pharaoh, could you please tell them to do their job too? Because the people who drop off the straw, they haven't been coming. Little do the foreman know. You don't call it a stupid idea until you know whether it was the boss's idea or not.
They knew it was Pharaoh.
Yeah.
Who knew?
The people.
You mean because of the
Verse 10.
right, verse 10, thus says Pharaoh, right?
But he said that to Moses and Aaron, not to the
No, he said, no, the taskmasters make that declaration. So in verse 10, right, the taskmasters say, right?
Why
And the
would
foreman went to the people. He said, thus says Pharaoh.
yeah, to see them go and complain, but why are they surprised?
Well, I think they're surprised because they don't quite understand why he's doing it, right? Because the part that's missing from this,
Slaves.
well, but hold on a second. I mean, they've been slaves at this point for, well, and that's a whole nother episode that we've done before, but they've been slaves for at least 100 and some years at this point. So if Pharaoh had wanted to increase their work and make them work harder, he could have done it before. What prompted this change in straw policy? What changed? Moses and Aaron, exactly right.
Asking for time off.
Exactly, asking for time off. Hold on to that idea, right? All right, so let's see Pharaoh's response.
Pharaoh replied, you are shirkers, shirkers. That's why you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Be off now to your work. No straw shall be issued to you, but you must produce your quota of bricks.
It's like, what a strange idea, right? You must be lazy because you've asked for time off. But that means by definition we're lazy, right? Is that we're and therefore we must not be working hard enough? So if you have so much free time to think about having free time, you have too much free time. So do this instead, and then you'll have less free time to imagine what having free time would be like.
They did not have Shabbos at this point.
They did not have Shabbos.
7 days a week.
When you're a slave to Pharaoh, yes, it's 7 days a week,
Okay.
365 a year. Exactly. So the idea that they have so much free time that they want more free time seems to be Pharaoh's logic, that therefore take away their free time and then they won't want more free time. There's maybe some slight problems in that logic. Everyone thinks that's airtight.
Well, since Pharaoh has never worked himself, he may not know what goes into working. Or
What do you mean? He's working hard. He has to deal with all these troublemakers.
Yeah, that's gonna make me mad. So he doesn't have to do that. He just has to deal with his harem and figure out which woman he wants.
That's a whole nother issue.
What did Pharaoh do all day?
Yeah.
What do you mean, what did Pharaoh do all day? He made the Nile rise and fall. He made the sun rise and sink. I mean, he was a busy guy. He made the crops grow and then the people thrive. Yeah, I mean, he also would have been in charge of the accounts. He would have been in charge of the military. He would have been wrangling with the various political factions within the Egyptian world of who was trying to get what out of the society. So, I mean, he would have had a full agenda. I don't think he would have just sat around, staring up at the clouds all day. But he certainly never had to make bricks his whole life. Yeah, he's never had to do that kind of activity. So think of him as like a CEO, right? I mean, you could say the CEO, what does he know about working? It's the factory guy who knows what working is.
That's right.
Well, yeah, but CEOs usually are quite busy.
But that's why we have undercover boss to show the CEO what the factory guy really does. And for so many of them, it's like eye-opening at what's going on and how they're being mistreated. I remember one who said they decided no longer to give free water to the guys in the warehouse.
Right.
And then the boss has to work without water. And he says, this is awful. But until he had to do it, he couldn't see that.
Yeah,
He never thought of it.
It does make a big difference. Unfortunately, Pharaoh is not likely to go and see what being a slave is really like. We remember the last Egyptian prince that did that, right? The last time an Egyptian guy who was raised in the palace went out and saw what was happening to the slaves, what did he end up doing? He ended up killing the taskmaster and having to run for his life. We call him Moses, right? So yeah, it's the problem with coming into contact with people that are different than you is you might develop empathy. And that's an occupational hazard when you're the God King Pharaoh. You don't want empathy for these people. You want to be able to use them because you never know when you're going to have to murder a whole bunch of them by throwing them in the river. Empathy is just a liability. Page 340, by the way. Okay, onward.
Now the foremen of the Israelites found themselves in trouble because of the order that you must not reduce your daily quantity of bricks. As they left Pharaoh's presence, they came upon Moses and Aaron standing in their path, and they said to them, "May the Lord look upon you and punish you for making us loathsome to Pharaoh and his courtiers, putting a sword in their hands to slay us."
What? What they do? Why are they complaining to Moses and Aaron?
You went and told Pharaoh that we wanted time off. We never told you we wanted time off, and now he's mad at us.
But shouldn't they be angry at Pharaoh?
Oh, that'll do him a lot of good.
Well, so part of it is it's no good to be angry with Pharaoh. Better to be angry at the people you can be angry with and not get killed. But the other part is Pharaoh has been consistent, right? Pharaoh has always been their owner, their taskmaster and supreme. He has always been cruel and mean, and they've survived up to this point, and they've done the work up to this point. The thing that changed were these two troublemakers, right? Everything was under control until you showed up. I mean, sure, they murdered a lot of our kids once, and sure, we have to, live in backbreaking toil, but we were managing. And now you come, and now it's worse. So it is actually very natural that they would be upset at Moses and Aaron more than the consistent force in their life. That is to say, more than Pharaoh, even though the consistent force is the reason why there's a problem in the first place. And unfortunately, we have that psychological hiccup for many of us. Right? If someone is in a bad relationship, and someone actually goes to the spouse, the abusive spouse, and says, I really think you're being awfully harsh on your wife or your husband. You can bet that the person who's been abused is going to get roughed up even more when they go home, and they're going to go to the person and say, why did you have to go and tell my spouse that you thought they were mistreating me, because they mistreated me even worse now? Rather than saying, maybe I shouldn't be living with the person who's abusive. Because the person who's abusive is consistent, and so we take their actions for granted, and it's the person who provoked them that we blame. We often see this as well within our own relationships. You'll sometimes see with terrorism, right? We expect terrorists to behave like terrorists. It's people who provoke them that are the problem, right? Oh, what did you expect if you went into that town, or you went into that village, or you told them to stop trying to murder these people? Of course they were going to get angry and kill more people. Well, yeah, but that's also wrong, and more wrong than me provoking them by pointing out the wrongness of it. But all the way back 3,000 years and much longer for human history, I'm sure. That's the way we behave. We give a free, what?
And what's changed?
What's changed is we should be aware of it. And at least we in this room and those reading the Torah should be aware of it, and hopefully will make an effort for our personal life or our community life to not fall into this trap, to recognize what is the root problem rather than just what has provoked the response by pointing out the problem. You know, the kid who said the emperor has no clothes, I always thought, I make you bet he got in so much trouble, even though he was right. I always imagined that the rest of that would have played out with, well, of course he said the emperor had no clothes, because he's just a little kid. What do we care about him? Everybody else can see the clothes, right? Yes, Your Majesty. Yes, Your Majesty. And the kid would have got home and been paddled back in those days. Okay.
Then Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Oh Lord, why did you bring harm upon this people? Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has dealt worse with this people, and you still have not delivered your people."
All right, so Moses.
Flows downhill.
That flows downhill, or in this case, uphill.
Downhill.
Right? Moses is chewed out by the foreman, and the foreman had been chewed out by Pharaoh. And what does Moses turn around and do? He chews out God. Right? So who's ultimately responsible for the suffering of our people? According to this line of logic, God. In reality, who's ultimately responsible for the suffering of our people? Pharaoh, right? But I thought God is the one who got us down to Egypt. Right? So this is part of the wrestle, is so who's actually responsible for the suffering? And the people are rightly upset that it's gotten worse, but sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. But there are a lot of irregularities in how these passages are put together. Again, don't let the translation fool you. Sometimes the Hebrew, or sometimes just the sentence, seems a little odd when you go back and think about, well, why would they say that? Or why would they ask it or phrase it that way? So we're going to go back and we're going to dig in and see if we can't learn a little bit of something about how this whole relationship worked, why people might have been upset the way they were upset, and we may learn a few things along the way. All right, so we're on the first half of the handout, and if you look back, we're going to be examining in these first 5 comments, we're going to be examining chapter 5, verse 4, which is right up at the top of page 339, right? And this is with Pharaoh's response, right? And he says, "Why do you distract the people from their tasks? Get to your labor." Seems like a perfectly innocuous question, or innocuous order, not a very polite one, but what could there possibly be to comment on? What does Rashi say?
Get to the work that you, Moses and Aaron, have to do in your homes. But the tribe of Levi was not put to slave labor in Egypt, as you can see by the fact that Moses and Aaron come and go as they please.
Did you notice that? Right, so what's Rashi's first problem is, what work could Pharaoh be ordering Moses and Aaron to go do? Is he saying they should go make bricks? But they can't be slaves. It must be, and this is a broader midrash, that the tribe of Levi actually were not enslaved in the back-breaking kind of work. They must have had special status among the Egyptians. And the proof we have of that, says Rashi, is that Moses and Aaron keep showing up whenever they feel like it. That's not normal slave behavior. Right? Normally you wake up, your taskmaster sends you out to make bricks, and he stands there with a whip. And if you walk off saying, you know what, I'd like to go talk to Pharaoh about letting us go again, just whoosh, get back to work.
But Moses had been raised in the palace. He was a prince. He wasn't one of the Israelites.
Of
course he could come and go.
That was 40 years ago.
What's changed? All of a sudden,
He was a murderer.
Yeah.
Remember, he left Egypt because of murdering the guy.
Well, that's true. He's come back now with the Israelites, so they see him different. Pharaoh sees him differently. Doesn't see him as his son that was raised in the palace along with
It's
him.
not the same Pharaoh.
Well, so there's also the question of whether it's the same Pharaoh, but definitely he sees him differently.
Yeah.
And definitely Aaron was never raised in the palace. And so the question then would be, why isn't Aaron working? What work do they go to? When he says, get back to your work, what work could be referring to? And Rashi takes the answer that he's basically saying, go home. right? Do whatever it is you do in your home, because I know you don't actually work the way the other slaves work because your group is special. That's Rashi's explanation. And it's one that is backed by Exodus Rabbah, by Shemot Rabbah. So the next comment, Rabbi Joshua.
Joshua ben Levi said, the tribe of Levi was free of backbreaking work. Pharaoh said to them, only because you are idle do you say, let us go and sacrifice to our God. Get to your labor for Israel.
Right, so in Exodus Rabbah backs up the idea that the Levites weren't actually working in the backbreaking stuff. So that's why they were interested in this whole sacrifice thing, again, which was going to come under the purview of that tribe. Remember, the Kohanim are part of the tribe of Levi. And therefore, Pharaoh is basically calling them out as being, well, you guys don't even have to work hard. That's why you're trying to, ruin everything. You should go back and work for Israel too, meaning whatever it is you do for your people that isn't about bricks, you should go back and do that and leave the people alone, right? Stop distracting them. But you're troublemakers because you don't work.
I think it tell us that actually Pharaoh was, giving them freedom, religious freedom,
right?
Because the Levites were not doing physical work, but they're probably doing something close to what they're supposed to do.
Exactly right. It seems to be indicating that among the Israelites, Pharaoh was allowing them to have their own religious group, their own religious caste. And yeah, he wasn't willing to let them go travel 3 days out and have a sacrifice party. But within their own group, if they wanted some of the people not to do the work and have their own, group not do the work, that was fine with him. He didn't care. As long as he got his bricks on time, he was fine. And now this special group who doesn't even have to work as hard as the rest, they're making trouble, and that might disrupt my brick delivery. Now I'm mad, right? And I'm mad at these people for disrupting this pattern. Make sense? Right? And you can kind of understand Pharaoh's annoyance. Look at all I've done for you, right? I just give you a block quota, for bricks. Block quota for bricks. Anyway, let's say that you got to make 10,000 bricks every week, and I don't say all of you have to each make 100 him, 100 him, 100 him. It's 10,000 bricks as a group, and as you decide to allocate your work amongst you, that's up to you. And if you want the Levites to sit around and just do religious stuff, that's okay. And the rest of you make the bricks, that's okay. But I expect my 10,000 bricks. Then I'm going to be angry. And if someone comes stirring trouble and talking about a 6-day vacation, 3 days out, 3 days back, that's going to definitely mess up my 10,000 brick plan. So nope, not going to have it. And I should have known the people who weren't going to be working the hardest are the ones who were going to be most inclined to talk about an extended vacation. Okay, but Ibn Ezra has a different interpretation.
His is, Moses and Aaron are representatives of Israel. All of you get to your labors.
All right, so how could it be that Pharaoh would be telling Moses and Aaron to go work when we know that Moses and Aaron don't seem to be doing any brick making? Because he wasn't talking to Moses and Aaron to do your labors. He meant Israel, go do your labors. And since you're the representatives in Israel, if I say go do your work, I'm talking to the nation through you. It's what we would call a very pshat understanding, a very plain meaning, sort of simple way of reading the text. Nothing fancy going on here, says Ibn Ezra. It's just talking to the representatives. It'd be like if there was an ambassador visiting some country and the country told the ambassador, go mind your own business. He wasn't just talking to the ambassador. He was talking to the entire nation behind the ambassador. And that's what Ibn Ezra says is happening here. But that's not as much interesting. So let's go on to the next one, the Rashba.
Go to your own work. Don't neglect your own business, and at the same time cause others to neglect my work.
Right. So I'll tell you what, Moses and Aaron, you go do your work and let the slaves do my work. Right. That's the way it's supposed to be. Don't be messing up my business arrangements here. Right. So whatever you got going on the side, you can go do that, but don't mess up mine. So Rashbam is a little more straightforward than his grandfather Rashi and says, it's nothing fancy about who's doing work or not doing work. It's just you do yours and let my slaves, which are basically me, do mine. And then we'll be okay. Make sense? Pretty straightforward. And Shadal gives a different interpretation.
Pharaoh was speaking to the elders who had accompanied Moses and Aaron.
All right, so the elders filter in and out of some of the episodes in the text where it says that the elders were there, or Moses talked to the elders, or the elders will later join him in a little Sinai journey. Reading here through the lines to say, well, he must have been saying to Moses and Aaron, right, why are you causing this trouble? And then he turned to the elders and said, and you should get back to work, right? Because he couldn't tell Moses and Aaron to get back to work because clearly they were not acting like slaves. But the other people that were there, the ones who had been encouraged or inspired to follow Moses thinking this was going to be Liberation Day, him or they, he turns to and says, get back to work, right? So Shadal is understanding that there's an implied contingent of Israelite representatives that have joined Moses and Aaron for this conversation, and that they are the target of Pharaoh's imprecation of get back to work. Make sense? Okay. But now that we have that in mind about some people are working, some people aren't working, or at least not doing the same kind of work, that might help us understand more the rancor that the Israelites have towards Moses and Aaron later. Right? So imagine, we can go back to the factory setting that you mentioned before. Imagine that you have factory workers who are the no more water policy on the factory floor. And so one of the managers, not the actual factory people, but one of the guys who sits up in the air-conditioned office watching the factory, decides, I'll go and talk to the boss about this problem. And he goes and talks to the boss, and the boss comes back and says, well, I'm going to turn up the heat now too. Well, the manager who was helping is still sitting in an air-conditioned office. But the workers, they're now without water and they're working in heat. Who are they going to be angry at? Right? And they'd be more angry at that guy in the office who was helping than they would be if another factory worker had brought up the problem. Because the other factory worker, at least he'd be right there beside them on the assembly line, sweating and being dehydrated. So you're with us, you know, solidarity, brother, and all of that. But the guy up in the cushy office who thought he was going to help us, man, I hate him. Because he really made things bad for us. And he's not even sharing in the repercussions, in the suffering, exactly. And there must have been some of that tension, right? Moses and Aaron, like we saw from the first round here, they're coming and going as they please. They're not acting like slaves. That must have built some resentment among the Israelites who were doing the backbreaking work. Right? Moses is still acting like an Egyptian prince, or at least a Midianite prince. Everywhere he goes, he becomes a prince. All right.
Pharaoh meant the quota of bricks was set when they were fewer, so their task is easier now. But you still have them on strike. All
right, and actually we should have reread verse 5, because there's a little bit of an oddity in here as well. And Pharaoh continued, right after he told everyone to go back to work, the people of the land are already so numerous, and you would have them cease from their labor. Right? So why does that one part follow from the other? Because there are so many of you, you want them to not work as hard? But I understand, the people should have to keep working because I want them to keep working. But what does the number of people and the amount of work they're doing have to do with each other?
See, when you had fewer people, they still had to make this large amount of bricks.
And
now that you have more people, they still have to make the same number of bricks. So they're not even working as hard. So you say they have to have time off.
And that's Abarbanel's answer, right? Abarbanel says, you just take the two and you make numerator, denominator. And there's more of you now to do the same work that I've been asking. So the per person work is a lot less. And you still have the audacity, the chutzpah, if such a word had existed back then, pre-Yiddish, you still have the chutzpah to ask for more time off. You've already got a de facto reduction in your hours because more of you are making the same 10,000 bricks. Clever man, Abarbanel. He was also a very astute politician. So he knew how the mighty would think. Of, hey, I'm just asking for the same thing I've always asked, and there's more of you to do it. So that's my vacation to you right there. I let more of you do it, and I didn't even ask for more.
My boss used to say, you got a vacation just working here.
Exactly right. I thought about giving you an assignment yesterday, and I didn't. See how nice I am?
this is all on the premise that there was a block number, as you said, 100,000.
Right.
But nowhere does it say that's the total. If it were really 100 per worker, then everything else.
Correct. So what's happening is many of the commentators are working off the idea that the quota was a singular quota for the nation, as opposed to quotas, which would have been one per person. But you're right, that's an assumption, which the text could support that idea of the block quota, or the text could also support an individual quota. But the majority of the commentators seem to be reading it through that line because it makes the arguments that Pharaoh and Moses have a little bit more understandable. They're arguing in the way they're arguing, and why they, when they adjust the quota, or not the quota, but when they adjust the straw rather than the quota, why that makes sense as a way to mess up the work without changing this to total number of bricks. So, but both could work from the text. You're right.
I don't get why Pharaoh would care. I mean, why didn't he just raise the quota? He's going to kill all the slaves and he wouldn't be able to do anything.
We're going to get there. Okay, so.
Okay. The people of the land are already so numerous.
Right, that's our quote.
Said, yes. That's Pharaoh's answer to when the Jews said, let us go, lest he strike us. Even if what you say is true, that pestilence or the sword shall come, I am not worried. For the population is so great that plenty of them will be left even after the disaster.
This is the very callous calculation of the factory owner, who says, you know, we could put in a sprinkler system. We could put in a fire escape. But if there is a fire and we lose 20% of our workers, we got plenty more. Right? It's too expensive to put in the safety equipment. It's cheaper to get more workers. Right? That seems to be Pharaoh's argument here of, don't threaten me with killing off my slaves. I got plenty of slaves. And again, as long as my quota is getting met, what do I care how many slaves I have, as long as I get the bricks I want? But then we still have to come back to this question of, well, what about the increase in the straw? I mean, if Pharaoh's not trying to push for more bricks, and it may just be he didn't need more bricks, why then mess with the quota? Why not just say, you guys, you're not getting a break, just get back to work? Why do this manipulation of the straw work? And Shadal is going to answer, or at least speak to that.
And that's because when Pharaoh said, you would have, they're so numerous, you would have them cease from their labors that were so bad.
Yes, exactly.
Why do you have the ceases? They are numerous, and if their minds are at rest, they will rebel.
Right. So why would you have the stop? If you have time, you will think about your situation. And if you think about your situation, you'll realize that you'd much rather be free. And if you realize you'd much rather be free, then you're going to rebel. And since you are so numerous, that could be dangerous. Right? So this is the line of argument that is, keep the poor working so hard, they don't realize that there are so many more of them than the rich. Right? That was the French Revolution mistake, is that there were so many poor people in France that all it took was for them to realize they don't have enough bullets for all of us guys. And since we're going to starve to death anyway, we might as well make a try for freedom. And that's the idea, is you want to keep the poor working. You don't want them just loitering on the street, starving to death quietly, because they won't stay quiet. They'll get uppity. Much better to have them working quietly, constantly, incessantly, because otherwise they'll realize A, how bad it is, and B, that there's power in numbers. And then they will be, and now you've got trouble. So Shadal, again, as another way, tries to neatly put together why them being numerous means they shouldn't have time off. Because people with too much time on their hands, they start plotting. And if they're numerous, their plots become dangerous. Make sense? All very good reads of this text. Anyone have a preference for the two pieces that we read? Because we're going to jump to the end of the story in a second. Well, we have a truck. Don't know. Sometimes for share the care, or the senior care that rent from us. What? It's not an ambulance. It's there's an ambulance behind them.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's probably what it is then. You know, hopefully everyone's okay. Thankfully, the fire department ambulance is right across the street
It's
from
right
here.
there,
Yeah.
Oh,
If you come out of Moss and you just go across the 434, it's right there.
and the police.
And the police department too. Although they often just sit in our driveway catching speeders.
Oh.
Yeah. Up Moss Road, 25. Trust me, that's what you want to be doing on Moss, 25. You see, there you go. Yeah.
I think I might have been going all of 30 and I got
They pull people over quite regularly there. It's a good spot for them.
Traffic school and it's like $120.
Ugh.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I know, right?
Well, I mean, Moss is it's a great attractive road because it's nice and wide. So it looks like the speed limit should be 35 or something, but it's only 25. And so it's a great place for them to pick up people that are just letting their foot sink a little on that pedal. But we don't mind because having them in our, yeah.
The GPS takes me through that street.
Yep. Yeah, but I mean, we don't mind, sorry for the ticket, but we don't mind having that extra
No.
police presence on our
great.
property.
I have the same on mine. There's always police going up and down because same thing at the end, there's a police department,
Yep.
and fire, and there are people always speeding on it. It's 25.
Yep.
Go through, yeah.
All right. So, like I said, did anyone have a preference? Anyone have a favorite commentator, or all of these people are making very good points and good ways to read it? Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get to that question where Moses kicks the can upstairs.
Wait, but what's your favorite?
It's like asking me what my favorite child is.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that I usually try to hold on to is that each of the commentators were trying to teach something particular by their commentary. And so they don't have to be mutually exclusive. They can all be meaningful in some way. If I had to pick a narrative that I would put into a novel with more of that internal dialogue of the characters and all of that, then I think some combination of the idea that Moses and Aaron were part of a privileged class within the slaves, that their group didn't have to work the same way everyone else did, and that Pharaoh was a little upset that they would be causing trouble, and that he would see this idea of increasing the straw as maybe a way to get that group to have to kick into action, that he was hoping maybe this would take up the Levites' time, that the people would say, look, we're making the bricks, you go get the straw, and then that would stop, as Shadal would say, people from having too much time to have these notions of freedom. But that would just be my novelization, because I think it sort of overall fits the interaction between Pharaoh and Moses and Aaron and the other people, and the foreman back to Pharaoh, and then Moses talking to God. I think it kind of fits that emotional chain, but I think all the commentators are making great points. Okay, 522. Why do you bring harm upon this people, right? So this is our next to last verse that we read, where Moses is talking to God, and it says that Moses returned to the Lord and is asking, why did you bring harm to this people? Why did you send me? All right, and here's what Rashi tries to help us, how Rashi tries to help us understand this odd sentence.
This is why did you bring harm to these people? And if you ask what business it is of mine, my claim is that I have a right to ask, because it happened on account of your sending me.
All right, so this may be a question that Rashi's answering that almost we would be afraid to ask, but the question is, what business is it of Moses whether the people are suffering or not? It's not to say whether Moses shouldn't have empathy, but how dare Moses criticize God? Right? Isn't that what Moses is doing? Why did you send me, God? You've brought harm to the people. I mean, he's blaming God. He's criticizing God.
Yeah.
And Rashi is answering the question of, before you get mad at Moses for blaming God, understand that Moses has the right to ask this question, because it's because of God sending him that these events were triggered. And yes, it's still Pharaoh's ultimate responsibility for doing what Pharaoh's doing. But if God hadn't told Moses to come and do this, the people wouldn't be working as hard as they are right now. So Moses has been dragged into this issue. Moses is allowed to ask God, how is this working out for the better? Okay, because right now it looks like things got worse. Make sense? Okay. But now let's get into a little bit more of what's happening between Moses and God here and the Israelites.
Moses here is passing on to God what the Israelites said to him.
right? So make sure we got that basic idea, right? It's not that Moses himself is necessarily complaining to God about sending him to help the Israelites and that not working. It's Moses is making it known to God that the Israelites are upset that God had sent Moses to help them and it's not working.
Well, it is God who has made Moses a messenger between God and the Israelites. So Moses is acting as messenger, saying, here's what the Israelites are saying. And when God tells him the answer, he goes back and tells them.
But doesn't Moses have faith? Right? God told Moses, I will deliver the people. God had that interaction with Moses, the famous burning bush scene. If anybody should believe that it's going to ultimately all work out for the better, it's Moses. And yet here Moses seems to be criticizing God, almost saying like, it would have been better if I hadn't come. So the commentators are trying to say, it's not Moses who feels that way, it's the people who feel that way, and Moses is just passing on their grievance to God. Basically trying to say, the people don't understand. God, don't you see what with the way you're doing this, they're getting angry at me, and they're getting angry at you because they don't see the big picture. I see the big picture because, you know, you, me, and burning bush, we got it. But the people don't. So help. And this is going to go into chapter 6 to help us see why chapter 6 does the way it does what it does, which is to reveal through the signs and the wonders that it's not just about teaching Pharaoh a lesson, it's also about teaching the Israelites a lesson. But let's go ahead and let the commentator expand on this.
Moses here is passing on to God what the Israelites said to him. There are many similar occurrences, but God had already told Moses, I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go, not because of a mighty hand. That is, not because of one blow or two, but only after I have performed wonders in his midst. But Moses was angry that God had not warned him that such distress would come upon Israel in the meantime. He had expected that at least their burdens would be lightened a bit. He was totally unprepared for them to be increased and had no reply when the foreman complained to him.
Right. So again, it's this beautiful human psychology problem of we were going to get out of here eventually, but I didn't think things were going to get worse before they got better. I thought that we would start the slow process of pulling the people out. Remember, he begins his opening bid. Let our people go and worship. Right? It's a very minor thing, and he was probably hoping for a little bit of compromise from Pharaoh, and then we could work later toward that whole freedom thing. But right now, you know, he was hoping for at least a little benefit. And he could go back to the people and say, guess what? I've got a 3-day holiday for everybody. Yay! And people would go, oh, God is great, and yes, that's wonderful. And then they would listen to him more, and then Pharaoh would compromise more, and then they would do more, and eventually we're walking out of here free and no one gets hurt. Apparently he was a little unprepared for Pharaoh being this royal pain and making things worse.
But your scenario, where things get a little lighter, and they can go out and worship, when Moses finally comes and says, okay, guys, tomorrow we're leaving here, they would say, wait a minute, why should we go?
Things have already gotten so much better.
Better. We're fine here. This is familiar. You want me to go to where? Some strange place? You don't even know where we're going?
Yeah.
And they wouldn't have gone.
Well, indeed, we know.
There weren't any that did say exactly.
I was going to say, we know only a few days later, they're already saying, you know what, maybe we shouldn't have left Egypt. And that was after the signs and the wonder and things being horrible. So yes, if things had been easy, getting them out, it would have been impossible.
That's right. If it weren't that cold up north, he never would have gotten me to move to Florida. Well, leave everything to some stranger. I can see how that's very difficult for people to do,
right,
unless they're really motivated by the work being even harder.
Right. Sometimes you have to set the bed on fire, or otherwise it's just a little too comfortable.
That's right.
And that's sort of what Ibn Ezra is saying, that Moses just didn't quite get. Right? Moses thought he was going to be the agent of only good for the people, that everything he did would only bring them benefit, and they would never be upset, never be resentful, never be any disagreements, that they would all see what he had seen at that bush, that everything was going to keep getting better, and he just wasn't planning on it getting worse like this. Moses occasionally seems to have that issue where the people respond to their encounter with God in ways that he had not prepared for. Because for him, he and God, he gets it. And I mean, that's the whole point of Moses and God and why we read the Torah rather than some other book, is Moses gets God well enough to write this book that the rest of us can learn as well. It's that no one else is Moses. that he has a unique gift, a unique perspective. Everyone else is going to need a little bit more help to get there. All right, let's see how Ramban helps us with this.
Since God had told Moses twice in chapter 3 and chapter 4 that the king of Egypt would not let them go, Ibn Ezra is wrong in his answer, because in verse 23 it says, still you have not delivered your people. Delivering can only mean bringing them out of exile, not a mere lightening of their workload. In my
Right,
opinion,
so make sure we got to understand of his critique of Ibn Ezra. Right, so Ramban says Ibn Ezra, who we just read, who said Moses was surprised because he thought things were going to get better little by little. No, that couldn't be the real answer, because God had told him at the burning bush that Pharaoh would say no, and that he would do signs and wonders, and he would deliver the people out of the land, not just a lightening of the load. So therefore, when he says the people are not delivered yet, it never means things are a little better. Delivery means getting out. So it seems to be here that Moses was surprised, not that things didn't get a little better, but he's surprised that it didn't get delivered. Delivered meaning the Exodus itself. All right, so then he goes on to give his opinion of what it actually means.
in my opinion, our master Moses thought God was telling him that Pharaoh would not heed them and let them go immediately at his command or by a sign or wonder until he had performed all his many marvels. But Moses thought he would bring them upon Pharaoh right away, one after the other, within a few days.
All right, so Ramban recast this whole argument very differently. Moses went to Pharaoh and said, let my people go. When Pharaoh said no, Moses was expecting, all right then, sleeves up, bam, 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 plague, 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 wipe out Egypt, let's go. And it's like 24 hours later. And apparently that's not what's happening. And Moses is a little surprised. It's like, God, I came and told him, let my people go. And he said no. And the plagues haven't started yet, and things are worse. God, you're leaving me hanging here. I thought we had a deal that this was what we were doing.
Imagine his chagrin.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I'll be back with a plague in a little bit. I just had to go check on why God is late. That's what Ramban is saying is happening to Moses here, of why he is calling out to God. No? No? What are we doing?
It's easier to say this is going to take a year. But why didn't God say that to Moses?
Well, and that's what Ramban is going to try to nuance out.
But when Moses saw that things had stayed as they were for 3 days, with Pharaoh making things worse and worse each day, and that God did not rebuke him, and he had received no revelation about what he should do, then Moses thought, it will be a long time.
I guess this is going to take time.
So what Moses meant was, why did you bring harm upon this people by sending me so long before the end of the exile? To have sent me until you were ready to rescue them. Now, rather than rescuing them, you have done harm to them. If this is how you deal with them, they will be finished off by the harm that finds them.
Right? So it's like, wait a minute. If you were going to deliver them next year, why didn't you send me next year? Why send me in the meantime, which is only going to give all this time for bad stuff to happen? And God is answering him then in our chapter 6, which, Harriet, if you could read the chapter 6 first verse for us.
Then the Lord said to Moses, you shall soon see what I will do to Pharaoh. He shall let them go because of a greater might. Indeed, because of a greater might, he shall drive them from his land.
Right? So, being that in chapter 6, God is telling Moses, I know that it's going to take time, and maybe I should have mentioned that before, and that it's going to take time to make this point, right? If I just showed up and did the old, there's a magic teleporter and all the slaves walk through it and boop, they're suddenly in the land of Israel, which, God could do, master of the universe and all of that, Pharaoh would not have understood. The world would not have understood. The Israelites would not have understood. Everyone would have been just impressed by one simple magic trick. But to have this whole cycle of events, which is going to last about a year, that is going to drive my message home to Pharaoh and to the Israelites and to the world. It's also going to drive home the message that redemption doesn't come easy, and redemption doesn't come quick, and redemption doesn't come often without a lot of suffering in the meantime.
And if Moses didn't come until the end, there would have been no prophecy. I mean,
Exactly.
Yeah.
There would have been no narration for everything that was happening in order to put it in the context. And Moses would have showed up and said, oh, by the way, that stuff that happened this last year, that was all about letting us go. It still might have let us go, but it wouldn't have had the same educational effect.
If, when you said if God had simply transported them to
Mhm.
the land of Israel, suddenly, it put me in mind of Abraham leaving with his wife from the,
Mhm.
and she looks back.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't great there, but she's looking back. And if the Israelites had suddenly been transported, I think they would have looked back. They needed the
Even more
lesson,
so.
even more so.
Yes.
They needed a lesson to be grateful that they were now in a new place.
And we're certainly going to see that once we finally leave, God makes it clear that we're not ready to march into Israel just yet.
That's right.
There are a lot more things that we need to learn, not Torah being chief, but also just how to be a nation and how to stand on our own 2 feet. So that's understandable. And I just want to finish with one little sforno, and then we'll call it a day.
Yes, Moses saying, if they were guilty of suffering such problems, why did you make me the one to be the immediate cause of it?
Right, and so this I just wanted to finish with, because it's a different topic, but it's such a nice little glimpse into how we might imagine Moses himself felt. Maybe that Moses was so proud of being the deliverer of his people, that he was so proud of being able to go back 40 years later and stand up to Pharaoh, who, remember, he'd run away from, at least the office of Pharaoh, even if it wasn't the same guy. And now he's back. But instead, Sforno says, no, Moses, humblest man ever, kind, empathetic, he doesn't like being the cause of trouble. He wishes that it didn't have to be him that was the agent of this suffering. But it's necessary, and that's kind of, again, what chapter 6 is telling us. God is saying, this is important that it happens. And yes, we all wish that suffering wasn't necessary in this case, but it is, so we've all got our part to play. But I just like that empathy that Moses has. He just wishes he didn't have to be the immediate cause of suffering. All right?
Yes.
All right.